Welcome to the College of Licensed Practical Nurses in Manitoba's 2023 Annual Professional Learning Module. This module has been divided into 4 units to make it easier for you to complete the module 1 unit at a time. Of course, if you wish, you can complete all 4 units in one sitting. Note that if for any reason you need to close a unit before you have completed it, your progress will not be saved. Simply take note of where you are in the unit before closing your browser, so you can fast forward to that same spot when you have time to return to the unit. The purpose of this module is to provide you with information about the Regulated Health Professions Act, which we will refer to throughout this module as the RHPA. This module will also help you understand how the RHPA will apply to your profession, your registration, and your practice as an LPN. At the time the CLPNM is posting this module, we do not yet know when your profession will complete the transition to the RHPA. We are actively working with the Government of Manitoba and anticipate that your profession will be regulated under the RHPA by the end of 2024. When transition does occur, it will likely happen quickly. There will be a great deal of new information for CLPNM registrants to review. This learning module will provide you with the foundational knowledge you will need in order to understand the additional information about the RHPA that we will share with you in months and years ahead. This module is organized into 4 units. Right now, you are watching Unit 1. This unit is the introduction. It will also provide you with an overview of the regulatory framework for Manitoba's practical nursing profession. This will help you understand how the RHPA will fit into the broader framework. Unit 2 will introduce you to the RHPA, why it was introduced, and what will change when your profession is governed under this Act. Unit 3 will introduce you to the Reserved Acts, which are healthcare activities that are regulated in a different way under the RHPA. Unit 4 will highlight changes to the CLPNM's Continuing Competence Program, or CCP. These changes are being introduced this year to correspond to how the CCP will be described in new regulations for the profession under the RHPA. All of Manitoba's LPNs must complete the full learning module, all 4 parts or units, before the registration renewal application is due in the fall of 2023. Now let's begin by reviewing the regulatory framework that directs and guides the practice and conduct of Manitoba's practical nurses. This regulatory framework is made up of a series of documented resources. The image on this slide shows the authority of these documents in descending order. As you can see, laws and regulations are at the top of the image, as laws and regulations carry the greatest authority. Legislation plays an important role in your profession. In fact, legislation is the means by which practical nursing is established as a regulated profession in Manitoba. Legislation includes written laws, which are also referred to as acts, and regulations, which elaborate on the rules created in their parent laws. Regulations help to define how the law will be applied and enforced. Through laws and regulations, regulatory bodies, such as the CLPNM, are granted the authority and duty to regulate a profession in the public interest. Regulating in the public interest means that the public's right to safe, competent, and ethical care, not the interests of the profession, must drive all decisions of the professional regulatory body. There are other organizations that exist to advocate for professional interests, such as unions and professional associations. Laws and regulations also establish the professional scope of practice of a profession, as well as requirements for registration, annual renewal, and continuing competence. Laws also outline a regulatory body's responsibility to accept, investigate, and act on complaints about members of their profession in order to keep the public safe in the event of incompetent practice or professional misconduct. You can see that legislation has an important role to play in the registration and practice of any regulated healthcare profession. Today, the specific law that governs the profession of practical nursing in Manitoba is the Licensed Practical Nurses Act. Until the profession's transition to the RHPA is complete, the profession will continue to be regulated under the LPN Act and its supporting regulation. When the RHPA does take effect for the profession, it will replace the LPN Act within the regulatory framework for practical nurses. The regulations that support the Act will also change. Since legislation plays such an important role in your profession, it is important for you to be familiar with the RHPA. The RHPA is the main focus of this learning module, but let's first take a quick look at the other components of the regulatory framework for Manitoba's LPNs, so that you understand how all of these resources work together and flow from the parent legislation. In addition to laws and regulations, Manitoba's practical nursing profession is guided and directed by bylaws, standards of practice and conduct, a code of ethics, practice directions, competency documents, and other guidance documents. The bylaws are binding rules made by an organization with authority to do so. Most of the bylaws describe governance requirements, while some establish rights and obligations for applicants and registrants. The CLPNM Board of Directors derives its authority to make bylaws from the governing legislation. These bylaws help the CLPNM regulate the profession effectively. Legislation also requires each regulatory body to establish standards of practice and a code of ethics. Regulatory bodies are also empowered by legislation to issue practice directions relevant to the practice of the profession. These resources, along with documents describing the competencies of the profession and other guidance documents, are part of the regulatory framework for the practical nursing profession. This regulatory framework applies across the profession in Manitoba to all practical nurses, regardless of their practice domain. Of course, your practice is also guided by employer policies, procedures, protocols, and other rules that are unique to your practice setting, which are not shown here. The resources discussed on this slide are not the main focus of this learning module, but are covered in more detail in the CLPNM's Jurisprudence Education module, which is available to help LPNs refresh their knowledge of the jurisprudence of their profession. If you find that the information discussed briefly in this module is unfamiliar to you, please take some time to also review the Jurisprudence Education module, which can be accessed from the CLPNM website. In this brief unit, we've discussed the regulatory framework for your profession, the role of laws and regulations in any regulated health profession, and your profession's upcoming transition to regulation under legislation called the Regulated Health Professions Act, or the RHPA. All of the resources discussed in this unit are available on the CLPNM website at www.clpnm.ca. Now, move on to Unit 2, where we'll begin to take a closer look at the RHPA.